Screen. Okay, brilliant. Welcome to this session about decarbonising aviation. My name is Marcus Alexander. I'm the Global Carbon Programme Lead for Shell Aviation globally. Hopefully by the end of this, you will have probably about as much of an idea about what that means as I do. I'm relatively new on seat, but really enjoying the role, so hopefully I can share a bit about aviation. I'm also the Black Employee Network Chair for Shell in the UK, and sit on advisory boards for the group Shell have set up to look at race and ethnicity globally at Shell. So hopefully we'll find time in the next half an hour to talk about that element of my work as well. This is a cautionary note which I have to share with you, which basically just means please don't invest based on anything you've heard today or you will hear today. I've got to flash it up. I'm assuming you've all had time to read it in the 30 seconds on the screen. A few things just around how I want this session to run, as it were. I'm going to try and be as authentic and transparent and open as possible. And given the nature of the event and what we're here for, it'd just be great if we kind of keep that collaborative feel. We're all part of each other's progression, and I kind of want to keep that motion and collaboration going throughout. Also, safety is a massive part of Shell and our culture. So if you are driving, but please don't just LinkedIn me and we can have exactly the same conversation one-on-one. And if you are sat at home or at work, just be aware of where your fire exits are, and also just make sure you can hear your surroundings. Okay, so I kind of wanted to start thinking about where Shell is. And looking at Shell's overall strategy, there is no denying that we all have to work to tackle climate change, and we're all in it together. And I think Shell's strategy really reflects that notion of purpose and urgency. So I just want to spend a few minutes kind of setting the scene with that. And I apologise if you joined the Shell session earlier and are already an expert on the strategy. You can ask the different questions later, because this might seem familiar, but essentially we've got 4 pillars, and these 4 pillars are interdependent. They are supportive of each other, and they're all equally important. The first is generating shareholder value. The energy transition, and by that I mean the progression to a net zero world, is going to be expensive. There's no two ways about it. And for businesses to play an active role in that, they need to survive, they need to thrive, and they need to have the money to invest in these new solutions, the money to invest in the energy transition. So generating shareholder value is vitally important to fund the work we want to do. Achieving net zero. And that doesn't just mean reducing our own emissions and achieving net zero as a business, but it also means working with our customers to do the same. I will spend lots and lots of time hopefully repeating that message, but it's all about collaboration across each and every sector, across every element of society, including government, other businesses, to really figure out how to reach net zero. So not just our own emissions, but how do we help our customers also reduce their emissions to net zero. The powering lives piece, for me personally, is an important one. The journey to an to a net zero future, so the energy transition, needs to be equitable, it needs to be fair, and it needs to power our lives as we go. Now, I say it's a personal one, so I've got family in Ghana, my mother, who's still on every couple of days we'll go through lights out. Friends in Nigeria similarly, and without access to energy, can't afford, healthcare doesn't work, education doesn't work, farming, etc. Life doesn't work. So making sure that we provide energy to everyone as we go is vitally important, as is protecting nature and respecting nature. I think Shell's purpose, this pillar of Shell's purpose now goes beyond not doing damage, and has moved to the space of improving biodiversity and protecting and nurturing nature. 2 words next to each other sound quite funny, but I think you get my drift. It's about being proactive in this space, working with nature and improving our environment. And as I said, all of these things are interdependent. We can't do one without the other, and we have to make sure that doing one doesn't prevent us from doing the other. So yeah, that I just kind of wanted to set the scene with that a little bit. I'm not going to spend too long on this slide, but I've included it because again, if we're thinking about our target is to be a net zero emissions business by 2050, and that's huge. And we are one. I mean, by huge, I mean that's an important thing to kind of pause on. And we're not the only ones with a similar target. You know, that companies and organisations all over the world are committing to that. And I think, you know, with COP around the corner, it's something that is at the forefront of all of our minds. It's not just companies; it's countries too. And there are, I won't spend too much time on it now, but again, LinkedIn or Q&A later. You know, there are lots of interesting elements where companies and countries align or don't align, and their ability to align as to how they get there is crucial. But I think the direction of travel and the intent is now undeniable, and these targets are a manifestation of that intent. We're an energy provider, so we need to make sure that the energy we provide is as low carbon as possible. We're an energy user, so we need to make sure that the energy that we use is as low carbon as possible. And as I said, we'll keep coming back to this, but that notion of being a partner to change, that notion of collaborating across the sectors, across the industry, across the world, really, to make sure that we are that positive force as a partner. Okay, so having whizzed through very quickly our broader strategy at a group level, I'd like to hone in on aviation just for a little bit. So one of the things I think I'm excited about at the moment in Shell is our new structure. Having just said how important it is that we collaborate and that we work across the sectors, Shell have restructured. Now we have a sectors and decarbonisation group, as it were, and of which I work in aviation, which is one of those groups. But working in this way allows us to put the customer at the heart of what we're doing. By working in, I suppose, like a vertically integrated way, whether people are policymakers, academics, other companies, or customers, we're not thinking in silos. We are thinking in sectors and trying to drive progress by collaborating across the sector and bringing in whoever we need to bring in to solve the problems and come up with more low carbon solutions for our customers. I think that idea is particularly important in hard to abate sectors. And again, we'll come on to this a bit later when we get to the report. But hard to abate sectors are sectors which are essentially hard to electrify, and they are going to need liquid fuels with a high energy density. I promise we'll talk through what that might mean later, to decarbonise. So having that sector's approach allows us to get close to our customer and better understand the issues that the sector are facing, and spend more time delivering value for that customer sector. Again, this is just more background on aviation, and I'm not going to spend much time on this slide at all, but it gives you a feel for how long Shell have tried to be partner of choice in aviation. We are celebrating 100 years, so we've got a new easy slide, which I just have to include. But you know, we are fueling aircraft all around the world. I think before COVID, it was every 14 seconds, and all the time we've been trying to do this in a very collaborative way with airlines, with people that fly, and again with government. In that bottom left-hand corner there, I've got the words avoid, reduce, and offset. Apologies for the size of the text, but that's also crucial. Avoiding emissions altogether is certainly the most positive thing we can do. If you can't avoid them, reduce them. And if you can't reduce them, and you can reduce them by increasing efficiencies, by using different sorts of fuels, which again, I promise we'll get to. If you can't do either of those, then you offset them. And you can offset them using nature-based solutions and other carbon sinks, carbon capture and storage. And we don't have the slide on this, but I did want to pause on those three segments because I think there can be a perception that I suppose industry is not doing enough and relying too heavily on offsets. But offset is the last option. The priority, if we can, is to avoid emissions completely. increase efficiencies to reduce them, and then if we can't, to offset. I should also, I can't actually see the chat, but please do pop questions in as we go, and then at the end, I'll find time to change my screen around so I can see the conversation and answer any questions towards the end. Okay, so decarbonising aviation, cleared for takeoff. We have established a relationship with Deloitte. Maybe some people from Deloitte on the call if they are that big. And together we are looking to deepen our understanding of how the different sectors work and the emissions from those different sectors. The idea being that we can't solve problems and we can't come up with low carbon solutions unless we have that understanding. I've included this here just to give you a feel for the percentage contribution of CO2 emissions. As you can see, aviation is around 3%, but road freight at 7.3 at the moment. Well, it wasn't in 2020, I believe. And then, of course, you've still got industry where the cement meters, the iron, the steel, they all have massive carbon footprints. And we call these sectors hard to abate sectors because they're difficult to electrify. And let me just pause on that concept for a bit because it's inherent to the rest of the presentation. If you can electrify a sector or electrify any function or process, that means you can use electricity to power it. And of course, if you have a renewable source for that electricity, whether that be wind or solar or geothermal, you can massively reduce the carbon intensity of that process, of that service, of that product. That is only possible if you can either store that electricity in a battery or use that electricity as it is created. Now, if you take aviation, which is my sector, so we'll stick there, that's where we're staying for most of the presentation, it's incredibly hard to electrify a plane and have it fly for any long period of time or over any long distance. Simply put, the amount of electricity you'd need would require a battery so heavy, your plane's not getting off the ground. The beauty of, or the benefit of hydrocarbon fuels, which is what we're used to now using, is that they have a very high energy density. And by high energy density, I mean that with a small volume of fuel, you get lots of energy out of it. So that's why we use, the current jet fuel that we have. So when we refer to hard to abate sectors, we're talking about areas of our lives where electrification is more difficult. Now, again, this is a very complicated slide, and I suppose I'm sharing and showing you these, I suppose, to demonstrate the thought that has gone into the report we've written, and therefore our strategy, which I hope we'll interrogate after I whiz through them. But this is just to demonstrate, and I am going slow, so we can have a second to read it, that aviation is expected to grow. More people have access to finances and therefore access to flight. I think it's something crazy, like 1 in 9 people have never flown. Only 1 in 9 people have ever been on a plane, but that's kind of predicted to grow in number rapidly. And as more people fly, the emissions associated with the industry will also grow. So even though we were only at, I think it was, 3% now, the point is in the future, that's scheduled to increase massively. So if we are to get to net zero, we don't have to kind of plan for today, we've got to plan for tomorrow, in 2030 and 2050, which is why we have to take action now to reduce the carbon intensity of the sector. Okay, so again, because it's such a short presentation, I am in many ways just giving you a little preview of what the study found to answer the question directly. But I will share the link to the report and encourage you to read it. I mean, not in full, it's 80 odd pages long. I don't think anyone's got that time. Well, maybe you do. If you work in aviation, you definitely should. Or reach out to me to discuss it in more detail. But the major results from our research was, again, as I've just said, because of its expected growth, we have to take action now. There are specific barriers to decarbonising the sector. One is regulation not being supportive enough and aggressive enough, and by that I mean creating new low carbon solutions is an expensive process. As I said at the start, generating shareholder value is so that we've got the money to spend on this, and we're doing that as an organisation. We also need government support to help us. whether they subsidize the cost of R&D, the cost of production, or the cost to customer by subsidizing the cost of flights. Investment is needed somewhere, and we need a regulatory framework which allows for that development. Again, I've mentioned the barrier through finance. That is, of course, linked to the fact that creating SAF, which is sustainable aviation fuel, which is made from non-hydrocarbon resources, so things like animal fats or used cooking oil or crops, so biofuels essentially, it's very expensive and it's difficult to scale. Again, this all links back to cash and availability of money. Leisure passengers are obviously reluctant to pay. I don't think I would be the same person if I hadn't gone to Malia after I'd be a better person, I should say, after my A levels with my friends, and it was fun because it was affordable. We've all got used to affordable travel. That's a trivial example, but let's be honest, there are far more important uses of aviation as well. And we have to make it has to remain affordable. I truly believe that aviation is one of the drivers for social mobility, as well as fun holidays. And someone's got to pay for it. And so a lack of willingness for the end users to pay for it again makes it difficult for us to meet our targets. I touched on the piece around concerns around offsets. The notion of an offset is I will still fly, I will still emit, but I will try and capture the carbon by planting trees or promising not to cut down trees. That's indirect. We're still emitting carbon, we're capturing it elsewhere, but we're still emitting it. And that's not good enough. So while offsets are important now, we've got to kind of look beyond that. I will highlight a few more around a few more of the key highlights. As I said, offsets are still essential. We believe that SAF, that sustainable aviation fuel I referred to earlier, is also key. The message that keeps coming across over and over again is that need to collaborate through the sector to drive down technology costs and use resources effectively. Of course, industry is competitive almost by definition, but your ability to collaborate means that you make the most of limited resources, and it means that you focus your attention on the technologies which are most likely to have the impact we need it to have. So that collaboration is key. Point number 8 kind of stresses the urgency of the whole thing. We have to front load, i.e. spend more and act now for the pathway to result in what we needed to result in, which is that carbon reduction. And again, I suppose that point 9 is very much linked to point 8 around that comprehensive, cohesive, sector-wide and in many ways sector-deep plan where we all work together. Now, again, I know it's a detailed slide, but I'm sure we can do it. I believe in us as a group. There are many ways to decarbonize. We've got to do all of them. As I said in that previous slide, we have to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, as soon as we can, as effectively as we can. So efficiency gains. Even before we're developing new technologies, everything from the flight path that people choose to take, how we choose to load planes, the height at which these planes fly, the frequency with which they fly. There are so many ways to improve the efficiencies, which will go on to reduce the carbon intensity of that process. I've mentioned SAF and I've mentioned offsets as the kind of immediate ways in which we can fuel planes with different fuel that has a lower carbon content. And then, of course, capture that carbon content from that fuel, because it will still be there. It'll just be reduced in offsets. If you like, those are the immediate ways in which this report established that we could take action to reduce emissions by 2050. Well, immediately, but also for our goal in 2050. There are others as well that may play a role in the future. As I said, batteries, i.e. electrification, is very difficult, but that doesn't mean we should invest in it now. That offers the only way to genuinely zero emissions from flight if you use renewable energy source to create the electricity, so that electricity has no carbon content, and you then use that electricity to fly. You've got a completely immediately carbon neutral flight. That's a way away, but to get there we have to work and invest on it now. Similarly, in that same bucket, hydrogen is one of those potentially carbon neutral sources, and I haven't done it yet, but it's on my to-do list. Not immediately after this call, it's Friday, but maybe on Monday. I'm responsible for developing our hydrogen strategy within aviation globally. I'm excited by that. As I said, it's not going to have an impact immediately. We've got to plan for the future and invest in the future now if we're to get there. And of course, that last point shouldn't be underestimated, behavioural change. This transition may not be perfectly smooth for everyone, especially if it's going to be equitable. People in the West, people who enjoy a certain standard of living, may need to make compromises so that more people have access to flight, more people have access to energy and food and all the other things. It's all interconnected. So there will have to be behavioural changes, and there will have to be compromises made. And again, we're not going to go into it too much now, but we try and play a role in each of these spaces. And on that behavioural change piece, a lot of that is our policy and advocacy work. Again, another complicated slide, but one I think we can cope with, that kind of just spells out how all those different actions over time will help decarbonize the sector. So this was our prediction that we've pulled together with Deloitte as to how to reach our target of net zero by 2050. I just pointed at my screen like you can see that. Of course you can't, but where it says number 1, that's where we're aiming for, 2050. And you can see that efficiency gains, which is that top orange bucket, continue to play a role right the way through. You've got bio-SAF, which is sustainable aviation fuel made from biogenic components. I really am throwing the jargon at you now, but biogenic components essentially means that is, as I said, used cooking oil, tallow, which is animal fats, or certain crops. So you take the carbon that's in those biogenic components, do clever wizzy things to them, and then you've got your biofuel, which is the same carbon content as with hydrocarbon, so that's made from oil. However, the biogenic component at the start has captured that CO2 at some point in its process. So the life cycle CO2 emissions from biofuels is a lot less than from hydrocarbons. Synthetic SAF, so synthetic sustainable aviation fuel, which is easy to say, instead of having a biogenic component, starts from that completely clean energy component. So as soon as you get to synthetic SAF, H2, hydrogen, and EV flight, the carbon intensity is a lot lower. But as you can see from the shape of the graph, they will not play we don't think they'll play a meaningful role in decarbonising aviation well until 2035, if not beyond. So we've got to take action now. And the action now we can do is high quality offsets, which I've described what they are. And we also see them playing a role for a long period of time. But I suppose what's exciting and what's hopeful is that you can see the offsets become less and less important as synthetic SAF, which still needs lots of technology development and de-risking and R&D and investment, grows in its significance, grows in its ability to help decarbonize the sector. The other elements become less and less important. I mentioned barriers earlier, and I promise this time I won't take a long time on this slide. But I've just included it, I suppose, to allude to the fact that it is not all plain sailing. While we have a vision for the future, there are still so many things which we must get over. So the demand piece is crucial. Let's say that Shell's developing sustainable aviation fuel. So we're producing SAF, which we've now established as a really positive thing. If the price of that SAF is too high, people won't buy it. They won't be able to afford to buy it, so they'll buy jet. In that time, we've invested that money in creating that SAF, but the demand side isn't there. So it's difficult to then get investment to create more. So we have to have a policy environment, a regulatory environment, which kind of elevates both. There's a good match between supply and demand. I'm sure there'll be one or two economists listening who think I have oversimplified that concept, but I'm trying to keep it moving on a Friday. And that's why regulatory incentives are so important, along with aligning technology so we can develop those new solutions as quickly as possible. I think the clarity on roles and decision making is also key. Again, I keep repeating that need for collaboration. Wouldn't it be wonderful if, as a sector, we focus on what we were good at? Each individual person, or rather each individual actor within that supply chain, focus on what they were good at, and you reduced overlap and you increased the amount of connectivity between each actor so that you were driving towards solutions, like one cohesive team. As I said previously, of course, competition will always be there, talking about commercial things, but you can still have competition within a sector which is collaborating for the ultimate goal, which is to decarbonise. With all that in mind, this sort of sums up the role which we think and hope Shell will play moving forward. And also, based on this report, and I should have said at the start, this report was pulled together after hundreds of interviews across the sector, whether that be with customers, other energy companies, government ministers, academia, etc. This is kind of our to-do list, as it were, and it summarises many of the points I've made. Got to produce more SAF at scale as soon as possible. Got to continue to invest in research and development as well as offsets. The certifications piece is interesting. We've not touched on it much, but it basically gives the market confidence in our solutions. So much of this requires measurements, KPIs, certifications, and audits to make sure that our carbon calculations are accurate, to make sure that we are all calculating carbon emissions in the same way, so we're speaking the same language again. Back to that collaboration piece, which I've stressed over and over again, and that includes regulators and customers. I think the last two, again, go quite well together. It's this notion of being a catalyst for change and a partner of choice. And a large part of that is education. We've got to try and educate everyone involved in the value chain so they understand what we're working towards and that we can all do it together. So I'm going to leave aviation now and check the time very quickly. How are we doing for time? Is it worth moving to any questions? I'm going to have to ask for people to come off mute, or for someone to come off mute to help me hear the questions, because I can't share screen. Actually, maybe I stop sharing screen. That might be the best way to go. Are there any questions based on all of that? 2 questions in the Q&A tab. Thoughts on the latest changes in the budget that tax long-haul flights but make it cheaper? So I think I need to be very careful about talking about policy changes, but all I would say is that it's that collaboration piece with government and regulation and driving the behaviours that we know are balance, sustainability, but also make sure that the world keeps flying. I'm not a tax expert, but I know that was asked anonymously. I'd be very happy to pick that up offline via LinkedIn, and if there's someone in Shell who can answer that question, I'll find them for you. What do you think the role of blend mandates should be? Are they an effective mechanism in terms of creating demand for SAF? I think they absolutely are. Blend mandates basically means, I should have made this clear as well, you can't fly on 100% SAF. You blend it with jet, so you know the jet fuel that you're used to. The more you blend, the lower the carbon emissions from that flight. I think mandates are crucial because they mean both the demand side and the supply side have a clear sign. The market has a clear sign that we need more SAF, and we need to find the money to both produce it and to buy it. So I think they're very helpful indeed. The issue of decarbonisation goes beyond aviation, absolutely. Do you think there will be more success recorded in the aviation sector? I hope so. It's a really lovely question to end on because I think we're out of time. I really do hope so. I think that that's why we're all here. We're all working towards that progress. And I think the signs are positive. As I said, I mentioned COP26, when that, I've said it 1,000 times, that collaboration piece is key. The intent is there. So yeah, I'm absolutely hopeful. I'm absolutely hopeful. Can someone from the Shell side help me with, are we allowed to overrun? I realise I haven't spoken much about things outside aviation, and I've got a bit of time. So I'm happy to stay on and answer any other questions that folks have. If not, I'm also happy to close the session. As I said, my name was I'm sure my name's online. I will check this profile. If anyone has any questions, please do let me know via LinkedIn, and we can connect separately. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, everyone.